Yeah.
Hit rewind, right?
Hello, my name is Matt Barnes. Today's date is October 30th, 2009. I'm interviewing Robert Dean Githens at Ball State University about his experiences in the military war era. And Bob, what unit did you serve with?
It was First Division Headquarters Company. I'm trying to, what's that, right? Yeah, Big Red One, Headquarters Division. Headquarters Company, Headquarters. Hiccup, hiccup, hiccup. Yeah.
What other units did you serve in?
That was the only unit I served in Vietnam. In Germany, I was in the 3rd Armored Division, 24th Battalion Headquarters for a couple of years. That was fun.
So, can you tell me a little bit about your early life?
I didn't know we were going to talk about that. Okay, I'm from a small town just north of here, Jonesboro, and I'm not sure whether I should tell this or not. I didn't realize until about 10 or 15 years ago that I'm sort of rebellious and I have a thing with authority figures, and that has kind of directed what I've done over and over and over in hindsight. And actually, that probably got me to Ball State. Because my father told me he wouldn't give me money to come to Ball State because I was going to study art and that wasn't serious. So I said, okay, and worked for a year and came to Ball State anyway with a couple scholarships that a friend of mine had gotten me. And in my junior year, I believe, I had a quote-unquote bad relationship, and couldn't take the emotional pressure of the breakup. So I joined the Foreign Legion, went into the a week before finals. And Dean Bell at that time told me I'd gone through all my profs and got my grades. And he called me in and told me I couldn't quit before taking finals. And I said, well, I've already got my grades. He said, I've got to leave. I can't stay. He said, well, you're going to flunk. I said, you can't do that. And he said, I can. And I left and did. So I flunked 11 hours and let's see, ended up a month later, I guess, in Fort Knox. The recruiter told me, you've got college, you'll be a clerk someplace, don't worry about it. Pick where you want to go. So this is a good deal. I take a vacation on Uncle Sam and go to Germany for 4 years. Having not heard, I knew nothing about Vietnam at that time. I was, 21, 22, something like that. I was a kid. And no offense. So I ended up as a rifleman and not very happy about it. And I'm not sure not become a rifleman, something. But anyway, I became a battalion draftsman. And I was a battalion draftsman there for about a year, I think. But on one of the maneuvers, I had an altercation with one of the guys and decided that I'd show them what's what. So I separated myself from the unit and up in the mountains in one of the training areas right on the German border, and proceeded to get lost in the mountains for 3 days because I knew the area where we were supposed to meet in 3 days when the maneuvers were over. And during that time, I kind of stumbled into East Germany and back. It was a long story. And evaded capture by our own guys. And got back, got arrested, got an Article 15, got busted to a G2, I think, or an E2. And the company commander knew me, and he saved me and made me an NCO, company training NCO. And I don't remember whether I was teaching arts and crafts at the service club at that time. If I'm going too fast, tell me to slow down. There's a lot of stuff. So I was teaching arts and crafts in the service club and getting paid as a civilian, and said, you can't do that. You can't be a GI and a civilian employee at the same time. I said, okay, I'll quit being a GI. He said, you can't do that. So I went to the service club, said, I have to quit, sorry. And she said, no problem. Pick a name and we'll pay you under the name and I'll cash your check and you can still work for us. And I was working there from 5 to 9, I think, in the evening and making more than I was as a GI. So that was a good deal. So I became John Primble. Shh, don't tell anybody. I had a pair of John Primble scissors that were manufactured in England, and that became my name from then on as a civilian. And that was fine until, as things happened, people kind of have relations with each other, and there was a certain lady working in the club, and then one thing led to another. That was good, except she also had a husband who was a captain and a boyfriend who was a second lieutenant. And about 6 months after that started, the things kind of, it became known, and we all of a sudden all got orders to go to Vietnam, except her. She went back to Long Island. And you can't do that. We can do anything we want to. All three of us head back to the States for leave and back to Vietnam. And I think at that time, I was a 3/4 ton driver for a truck, I think. I had bumped around all kinds of specialties, except what I was really doing ever since I was in. I drove a Jeep, drove a tank. Oh, no, I was a fire direction coordinator for a 4.2 mortar crew, which I knew absolutely nothing about except I'd read the booklet. So I went to Vietnam as a fire direction coordinator for a 4.2 mortar platoon. And I think, well, they'll realize that I can't do that and everything will be okay. So I arrived in Vietnam and told them at the headquarters there, you know, I'm going to get somebody killed. I don't know how to do this, da-da-da-da-da. Fortunately, I also was very sensitive to the heat. Had a heat stroke and ended up in the hospital for, I think, 2 or 3 days. And they, well, you can't do field duty. We've got to get you someplace where you won't be exposed to the heat all the time, which is a hard thing to do in Vietnam. So I ended up being assigned to the headquarters company as a draftsman because that's what I'd done most of the time I was in. And headed up to Lai Kay. Got off the plane and got on the Jeep, and they said, get in the ditch. So we did. And a few rounds went into the landing strip, and that was my introduction to my home base, was getting in the ditch. But there's water in it. We don't care. So it was off the back of a C-140 cargo airplane, into a Jeep, into the ditch. Then we finally got cleaned up, and gets shady from there on. I ended up at the headquarters, but I did. I have a habit of falling into stuff, I guess. And but that was okay. I met my boss, who was an E7 career guy, and all the rest of us were either drafted or just happened to stumble into things and got there. And basically it was explained, well, our assignment is the general once a day, and the rest of the time we do maps and training charts for the company commanders and the officers. And so, well, that sounds like fun. And you'll work from either from 12 to 12. That's your choice. And you're new, so you're 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. Oh, the other way around, 12 noon to 12 in the morning. And that's kind of how it went for peaceful. And, well, no, it wasn't. It wasn't peaceful. I guess the first month, we lost one of the guys in our tent. Got hit as a result of the round that went into my locker. We had all ran out of the tent and into the bunker. Each tent had a bunker between them. There were rows and rows and rows of tents. And we ran into the bunker, and he was curious to see what was going on outside. And bullet smells bad in a bunker after a few days. After I got there. Most of the time, though, it was pretty cool. You got used to ducking about twice a day, and the rest of the time it was, oh, what are we going to do? Oh, so and so wants this. Statistics and more or less made them reflect what the general wanted to say. And it was fairly uneventful, I guess, up until I kind of don't have a real sense of the timeline. It was a while ago. The things that I remember the most about it, though, was that we had a great lunch hall. That was one of the only permanent buildings on the entire complex, except for the general's mansion. It was an old French mansion. And we could eat as many times a shift as we wanted to. And you couldn't tell the difference between the turkey and the chicken, or turkey and pork, except it was pretty good. Rolled things of nondescript stuff. And ice cream that melted and stayed there. It was weird stuff. All the liquid would come out and the ice cream would still be there like a sponge. And all in all, we had a pretty good time. It was kind of interesting to see the wet season. You could kind of, when it started getting wet, it would literally almost rain sideways sometimes, and the rain would hurt. It was coming down so hard, and the roads and ditches would become rivers, but right through the plantation and just wash everything away. And the would become like gushers. The water would go in one end and spurt out the other end of the bunkers. It was raining. Of course, we didn't have much activity when it was raining either. Let's see. I'm trying to think of some other things that. When it was slow, we at the time women from the village, Bencat, which was about 15 miles away, would come in and they'd allow them to work on baby. They'd do laundry and polish our boots because we were high living there at headquarters. Those women that eventually became a wife, we'll talk about that later, I guess. And that was fun. When things got when there was very much activity, they had to stay home because at night their village was communist. During the day it was friendly. It was like, oh, okay. And that was kind of strange to accept that. And of course, to get to their village, there was another village, I don't remember the name, on the same road that was communist. So you had to be careful when you went through that one. And we had a village that was inside of our area. Out of 3 Constantine wire. We didn't think that was fair because we only had 2 rows of it where we worked. The compound we were had just yeah, and you had to have your clearance to get into the headquarters, which was beautiful. The headquarters, we got into it one time because I don't remember, most of the officers were gone for some reason, so it was left to the enlisted people. We'd have to find out how they lived because the officers stayed down there most of the time. And it was almost all underground except for probably about 10 feet of fill on top and a small opening, maybe about 10 feet wide, which was about maybe 15 feet from the tent where of course, we were up on the outside. And our instructions generally, if we had rockets coming in, we would run down we could stay down in the foyer of the bunker. It was nice down there, air conditioned. And the only other time we was one morning, I don't remember how it was still dark, where we had incoming. I believe I'd talked to you about incoming, where we actually saw the tails of the rockets going over, which that's good. If they're going over, they're not going to hit you. And we couldn't get out because we'd made a fancy door. It had been kind of slow, so we made a Dutch door. that had a sliding lock on it. We couldn't get the lock undone, and we'd hear them coming, and we'd duck under tables, and the tables were like half-inch plywood. Wasn't going to do anything really, but we felt good about that. It's crouching under desks and under the tables, and every time we get up, we couldn't get out finally. But that was, except for when I became a short timer, or I had less than a couple months, then you get really scared. But it's the first time I really got scared. That's not fun. The other stuff was just, it's really easy to discount the violence and the other things that go on unless you're really, really close to it. And for the most part, I became close to it only secondhand, either from a rocket. And there's some things I'm not sure how I should word it. We had, being kind of rebellious, looked for, I think, things out of place. And one of my fellow draft people, I was ranking, so I got. I told you we didn't have any weapons. Early on, I think the second month we were there, they were short on weapons. The Vietnamese army was. So it was like, okay, anybody wants to surrender their weapons? Well, I don't want to use it anyway. And we're inside of 2 fences. And the theory was that we're pretty secure here. So, yeah, you can have mine. I don't want it. And I think everyone in that platoon, I think we all gave up our weapons. And the only time I had a weapon was when I got to do, I was unofficially the sergeant of the guard. I'd get the strap on a 45 and feel like John Wayne and take the guards out and that kind of thing. And it was really ironic. I don't remember whether, I think it was somewhere mid-68, it got so quiet, quote unquote, dress parade on the dress mounting, I don't remember the exact terminology. We actually had dress parade and guard inspection on the parade. In Vietnam, we didn't do this in Germany. And we go out there and walk up and down, and get in the Jeep with Jeep and bump around the perimeter and put them in their places and see where they were going to be. And the only time that I actually came close to actually inflicting some harm on someone was the guards. I mean, they were a lot more scared than I was because they had to stay there. I got to leave and go back to the tent. So where am I supposed to, what's my area? I said, well, it's from there to there. He said, what do you mean? It's from there to there. And it was getting dark. So I was frustrated. I jumped off and got the 50 caliber and unloaded, I don't know, 200 or 300 rounds across the area that he was supposed to be guarding in the direction of the village that was inside of our perimeter. And I often wonder about that, but I try not to worry about that too much. It's my job. I showed him. So if you see anything moving in that area, shoot it. That was our instructions. So you, more or less, you do what you're told. That was my extent of guard duty. And a fun story now. Fun story was every Friday the general, his compound was probably 100 feet from our tent, and the mess hall. No, not our mess hall. He had his own mess hall. It's surprising how little you remember sometimes. Anyway, having part of our job was to relieve the guards, we found out that every Friday the general got lobster. And we were eating beef and steak and whatever, but he got lobster. And we befriended the cook, and every Friday we got lobster.
Which general was this?
That was General Ware. who, yeah, he was shot down a little bit later. And that was our treat every Friday. So it was like, all right. And we'd bring 7 lobsters back. We probably ate more than he did. Well, I know we did. We took 7 back. Everybody in the platoon got lobsters, and that was Fun Friday. We knew when Fridays were. Now, for the not-so-good story, that was General Ware. I don't remember when it was. He was on a reconnaissance or just a informational flight around the area and was shot down, I believe, well, everyone in the helicopter was killed. And there's a big to-do. I've got photographs of that, big to-do of the ceremonies there. And that was a shame because he was a really good guy. Everyone liked him, except we made us take down our penthouse pictures, but we could live with that. Really good guy. Had a I don't know what kind of dog it was. I think it was some wolf husky mix. And he would bring the dog along. The dog would be in the Jeep most of the time when he was on base. And really never mistreated anybody. Good man. Now we get to tell a funny story again. The highlight of that is one evening, I think it was the only time I ever saw him. General Westmoreland came, not every night, but at least once a week he would come. And one night he was coming out as we were going to the tent for something or other, and we talked a little bit, and he wanted to know what our dog's name was. And I said, well, our dog is Tum Shit, and that's Bitch. And that's a mixed dog. We never know what. You got to have things like that to keep you sane. And we had 2 while we were there. We had 2 litters of pups. We called them little bitches all over the place, and didn't get to bring them home. We left. And one of the guys had a monkey, but and we all had little. I remember all kinds of little pets we had now, grasshoppers, and they weren't fire ants. Well, they may have been fire ants, but we found that you can feed a grasshopper that's about 2.5 inches long to fire ants, and they'll just eviscerate it completely in about 2 or 3 minutes. And that was a lot of fun to watch that. Occasionally we'd go out, the nest would get too close, and we'd pour about 5 gallons of gasoline down the ant holes and light it. And that was fun. Didn't do anything to the ants, but it was fun. And occasionally we'd catch a mouse or something. It was boring because it took too long. But and geckos, and can we say that's exactly what they sounded like, with an F. Huck you lizards, huck you, huck you, huck you. Drive you crazy during part of the season. And that was one of the amazing things there. The seasons were it's like warm all the time, except warm there is really cold when it's wet. During the wet season, it would get, my guess is it was in the 50s, low 50s. It was so cold. I mean, they'd put on the itchy wool blankets and everything, and still just really be cold because we didn't have any kind of heat. Well, we didn't have air conditioners either. We had fans, but no heat. And in the dry season, it was so hot that for me it was a healthy thing. I've got dry skin, and that was wonderful. I used to take 2 or 3 showers a day, and normally if I take 1 shower a day, I'm itchy, but that was wonderful. And to see in the wet season, the green would kind of come from all of the trees. We're in a rubber plantation. The green would kind of spread over everything within a month. Then there was grass. I mean, everything was green. And in the dry season, it would kind of gradually shrink back to the trees. And one year, I'll do an ad for the people that got exposed to Agent Orange, because I think we were exposed. They didn't tell us we were, but one dry season, all of the trees, I mean, there was not a tree left in the entire base. This is a rubber plantation. And I'm going, wait a minute, they don't drop all their leaves. Well, they did. I mean, it was like a foot of leaves all over the base camp, and we're going, no, it's natural. It wasn't natural. I think it was age place, but maybe that's what the sitch is. We all brought back some kind of something, I think, that we still have. So tell them to take care of the Agent Orange guys. Let's see, where was I? Oh, the season, yeah. I really enjoyed those. My background here was, before I went, was art, and I found a receipt. I have a receipt for the Pentax Spotmatic that I bought in the PX for $126 with all the lenses and everything, and I took pictures all the time. The geckos, the leaves, I've got tons of pictures. Actually, I took more then than I do now, in digital now. It was a little bit harder to record them, but when you can actually hold on to it, it was kind of cool. And there were some things I absolutely don't remember about the base. We had an NCO club somewhere. I went to it once, but basically in Germany I quit drinking. That's another story. So I really didn't, that wasn't my kind of thing. But later on, we must have had an NCO club because, or not an NCO club, it's affiliated with the service, but it's not part of the service. Because I have photographs of a ribbon cutting ceremony with the women that ran those clubs. I may remember that someday, I may not. But I think that was probably in the late 80s somewhere, or late 68, where it was relatively quiet. When you got bored enough to think about having fun, I guess. I'm starting to ramble, aren't I? I'm trying to put things together in a logical kind of thing. And I'm not sure where it happened, but somewhere along there I decided that I was in love with one of the women that was working there, and she was, I don't know, 20, she's about my age anyway. And I decided that I wanted to go meet her dad, because you absolutely didn't get to do anything without meeting Dad. So we fixed it up one day for me to visit her village, and I'm not sure how I did it yet because it was crazy. I had to go in my civilian clothes. I couldn't carry a weapon. I had to walk all the way through the village. The bus stopped in the center of the village, and she was way out on the western fringe of the village. And the only way I could go was to follow the instructions. The instruction, you take the bus separate from her, you get off at the village square, you walk on the opposite side of the street from her, about 10 paces behind her, all the way to her home. And when you get to the house, you stay there till the next day. I don't know whether I like this or not. So I did. And I think, this is crazy, this is crazy, this is crazy. You don't do dumb things like this. But I'm not known for taking the safe route, I guess. So I did, and met her dad, who hated me because I was one of the... He was a good Catholic. That her mother had died earlier, but and she had 2 children. And amazing, which I found out later, most of the little small villages did the same thing. They had several, I think we had probably built them or taught them how to do it, built public restrooms, which amounted to a porta potty of sorts, a crapper up over a pond. And you'd walk out up a gangplank and you do your business, and it would fall down into the pond, and the fish would eat it. And of course, if you had to urinate, you just did in the rice paddy, because almost everybody had a little paddy out behind their house. that they would, all of their water in that village anyway, most of the water was from rainfall. They had cisterns, and when it was really dry, they went to a local well. But most of the time, it was water runoff from the roofs, and like half the people in the village. Well, she was a little bit. She was probably. Everybody was kind of class conscious. If you had more money than your neighbor probably worked for you. And you worked for the other neighbor that had more money than you. It kind of passed it down. It was really kind of interesting, even in a small village like that, to have that many levels of class. The folks that had the masonry structure in town, down almost by the square, was one of her nieces, so she'd go down and get water from there. But anyway, they kept the pig because they were pretty well to do, so they had a pig and chickens. The chickens were raised above the ground, the pig was under the chickens, and they would do the business. They would run off into the rice paddy. She slept in a hammock with her two daughters, and Papa slept on what looked like a large coffee table made of teak, because everything in the village that was wood just about was made of teak, because they're in a teak plantation. I mean, that's what grew there. I'm going, wow, roof members and things, these are teak. It's like, wow. Didn't get to bring any of it back, but actually the most prized lumber for them was plywood, because plywood doesn't grow in Vietnam. Pine doesn't grow in Vietnam. It's like tropical hardwoods. Oh, a little side note. If I get too off the side, remind me where I'm going.
I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your overall view of the South Vietnamese?
I'm trying to remember what it was like when I first got up. I was really, I don't think I was ever at the point where I considered them in general as the enemy. From the beginning, I kind of looked at it, or very shortly after I got there. I'm maybe too naive to think any other way, but particularly after talking to them, it was kind of an unfortunate thing where I'm almost sure that a lot of Vietnamese didn't know who the enemy was. We didn't know half the time. I mean, half of the women that were working on our base may have been the enemy at night. It was, and that's how it was most of the time. It was kind of a real gray area where, unfortunately, we were kind of playing the game where, wait a minute, there's bad guys out there, but we don't really know who they are, but they're trying to kill us and we're trying to kill them. And that's almost what it came down to. And as far as the military operations, I don't know whether it was by design. I suspect it probably was, because it's very political. Whether it was by design or not, but being in headquarters and seeing how things were done, we had specific orders to, well, you can do anything you want to there. You can drop as many loads of ordnance as you want to in this area. You can't do anything there. If you want to do something here, you have to ask. And by asking, it would either be get permission from the local militia, the local army, or the local village chief or whoever to go into that area. So it was almost like sometimes where we had this mosaic of, well, we've got a bunch of stuff. Well, where do you want to drop them? Put them over here. There was one area not far west of us that was a free fire zone. You could do absolutely anything in that area that you wanted to, and it was purportedly laced with tunnels and things, and it's true, it was. There were no people living there, though. That's not what it was. A huge plantation. And part of I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but there was a large push for PSYOPs. I think it started in '68, psychological warfare, where the philosophy was, ironically, kind of what we're doing in the Middle East, um, where the philosophy was almost like, well, wait a minute, these people really aren't our enemies. They're kind of pissed off because we're here, and they and it really doesn't matter. It's like some of the it's like, wait a minute, that's kind of like we were a couple hundred years ago. It was like, hey, this is our place, get out of here. Let's do what we're going to do. uh, that wasn't really spoken of, not officially, but that's amongst ourselves. That was kind of the attitude I think a lot of us had. And I don't remember when was whether it was Nixon or Johnson that escalated the bombing around Christmas one year. Um, Johnson. Anyway, the most frustrating thing for most of us being over there was every time the peace initiatives were active, we got blasted to heck. I mean, it was hell. I mean, we hated it. And then, or no, well, I don't remember whether it was when they were talking or when they weren't talking. But anyway, it was, well, they're either talking or not, and we're getting the hell blasted out of us, or they're not talking now, and oh, hey, it's vacation time, we can go play. So it seemed more like a game between the politicians than it was us. And I'm not getting things in chronological order, but the frustration always, almost always for us was that it was such a, militarily, it was so limited. Uh, I think even when we did believe that it's like it's us against them, um, it was kind of a limited kind of thing where you can not touch that village, you can go to that village, you can go to that village, but you have to let them know. And it's like, well, wait a minute, if we let them know, there's no surprise. It's like, we're going to get massacred. Um, and we would go in and take some territory, and the next day, leave. So you never knew what was what. Everything was kind of gray.
So how did it make you feel, and the other soldiers, when you'd have to go into an area and then leave it?
Oh, we were pissed off most of the time. It's like, what do you mean? We did that for nothing. So X number of people got killed, and for what? There was no territory except our base camps that was static. Everything was kind of up for grabs, over and over and over the same piece of ground sometimes. Um, uh, and in our area, it was 10 minutes after you left an area, we'd have rockets coming out of the same area. Or we'd drop 3 loads of B-52 bombs into it one evening, and the next morning we got hell from that same place. So it was almost like, well, no, it was like we kind of just said, well, it's kind of like the revolution. The Indians are behind the trees shooting at us, or the revolutionists are behind the trees shooting at us, and we're standing in rows, in lines, getting shot at. It's like we're static and they're not. So it became a real frustrating thing that we're going to lose no matter what. That was almost the attitude. It's what, with the restrictions that we've got, you can't win. The best you can do is just not get shot, not get killed. Just kind of play the game by the rules. Because you really, time and time again, it was like, well, there's a bunch of guys right there. Well, we have to get permission to go there. And by the time you got there, nobody was there. Bummer. Real frustrating. That's the part I'd like to forget, I guess. Yeah, lots of guys got hurt that way. By the times when the guys got hurt, it was because they couldn't do what the captains or what the guys in the field wanted to do. It was like, well, no, you can't do that. And I think that's why some of the really bad things happened.
you ever come into contact with ARVN troops, and what did you think of the ARVN?
Yes, and that's one of those. So many questions like that for me are like, yeah, it's almost like the troops that I came into contact with were almost doing the same thing that we were at some point, just surviving, doing what they had to do to survive, trying not to hurt anybody else, because in their case, a lot of the other guys were their friends or families' friends, or things were so mixed up that you had no idea who you were shooting sometimes, or who you were shooting at. Overall, there was kind of an underlying feeling that they were kind of lazy, they were kind of cowardly. I think it mostly amounted to the fact that they just weren't trained. They weren't trained. They were young. They weren't trained, and they had been in the middle of this for how many years? They're just flat out tired of it. You know, it's like, we don't care. We want it to stop. That it became kind of like a feudal kind of thing, where it really didn't matter. You were on the side where you thought you were the safest. It had nothing to do with anything else. It was more or less survival. And I think that's the way it was for a lot of the population. It was just say what you need to do at the moment to survive, and say maybe something else when at another time to survive. And that's how confusing it was a lot of times. It's like, well, we don't know what's going on. And militarily, I think it became the same kind of thing. To us, sometimes it was just a big joke. The ranking, we're there from 12 o'clock and 1 or 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, almost every morning. We had, we called them the bomb boxes. We had 3 boxes that were 1 kilometer by 2 kilometers in length, and it was our job to put them on the map. And wherever we put them on the map, that was where, I don't remember, it was at least 3, it may have been 6 B-52s would unload their ordnance in that box. So it became almost a game for us. Supposedly we were supposed to do it where there was problems over here, problems over there. Well, the truth was that oftentimes there were no hot spots, or there were hot spots everywhere. And the ranking person there, I think, we were all 3 E4s and 5s. The ranking person wasn't working when all this happened. So it became a game sometimes. We'd go, well, okay, drop them over in the Michelin plantation. Nobody's over there. We'll get a bunch of buffalo or something. One night we dropped them as close as we possibly could in a free fire zone. I don't remember where it was. But we thought, well, it's close enough that we can go up the radio tower. We had a 30-foot radio tower made out of I think they're probably 8-foot wide scaffoldings. So we go all the way up to the tower because we knew when it was going to happen, and we're sitting there eating popcorn and watching 3 boxes full of bombs. And it was cool. Everything was shaking, but sometimes, unfortunately, that's what it amounted to was, let's put them somewhere where nobody will get hurt, or what kind of fun can we have from this? We got to do it, may as well do it. And it's amazing, a lot of the ordnance that we're using there was leftover stuff from World War II. And I don't know whether, well, my attitude was, unfortunately, was kind of shared with the platoons I worked in. The guys who were actually in the field, for their survival, I don't think they could afford to have that attitude. They were a little bit more one-on-one, personally responsible for what they did. But for us, it became a game that, okay, we'd, ironically, and I'm not even sure how we did it, we were watching television. We were watching World War II movies, war movies on television, and Kong, which was a favorite series in Vietnam, was fathering kids. It was oh shoot, Cost Cartwright and the Cartwrights, Bonanza. That was the #1 series in Vietnam, and we'd watch that and play pinochle of an evening when things were quiet. Oh, and you asked about when the rockets were coming in. It's hard to remember. It's pure instinct, really. Get under something, get in a bunker, get in a hole somehow as fast as you can. And to do that, you would go through, over, under anyone that got in your way, just as fast as you could, because it was, you didn't know. Like one of the guys got killed from a piece of shrapnel, and it hit a tree probably 30 feet in the air. So it wasn't just an isolated thing. It was you hoped it didn't hit anything close to you, because chances were pretty good that you'd at least get wounded if it was anywhere within 50 or 100 feet sometimes. And it was the feeling of not knowing, because they would come from anywhere around the perimeter. And we found that out over and over and over again. It didn't matter if the area was cleared 15 minutes before, 15 minutes later. You likely have incoming, because they would set up with a stick, a rocket and a stick, and light, and it's gone, and you're gone too. By the time it's gone, you're gone. Very, very portable, very hard to catch who did it, and that was one of our jobs. Okay, we've got incoming. We didn't have GPS then. Well, the other guys did. We didn't. We had we would get the calls in. Okay, it's coming from here. We'd put a mark on the map. We'd tell the artillery guys, shoot there. By the time they shot, nobody was there. And it became a frustrating game like that, where mostly you felt like you were just shooting ordnance out there, hitting cows or pedestrians or whoever, rather than the guys that actually did the shooting. And talking to the guys that came back from the field, the same kind of thing. You were kind of targets and then when you became a target, you shot back. By the time that happened, you weren't a target anymore. They were gone. Because you're talking about people that lived there, knew the terrain. We didn't. It was kind of just frustrating after a while, kind of hopeless. What are we doing here? We've got no business doing here. We're not doing anything. We can't do anything. It was like at times it was, well, we'll just nuke the entire country. That'll fix it. It's only about the size of California. A few nukes and that'll solve the problem. But we're civilized. And that wouldn't have been a good thing. That was kind of a joke anyway. And of course it was really, I guess it was probably one of the first civilized wars that we had, where it was, okay, the bad guys are scattered in with the good guys. Your job is to go get the bad guys, but don't hurt the good guys, which is pretty impossible to do under the best circumstances. So it was pretty frustrating. I think that's why a lot of times we found things to just forget about it. Did other things, play lots of pinochle, go get really good French fries. Best French fries I ever had in the world were from one of the local stands in the village. And some of the best times we had were, fortunately, we were in a position where our platoon had a helicopter and a pilot that we could some in just about any time during daylight hours. And where do you want to go? Let's go to Saigon. So we take this helicopter to Saigon, stay in Saigon for a while, come back, or a couple times we went to Cambodia, but we can't go there, so we can't talk about that. Which we still think to this day General Ware got shot down over Cambodia. But I don't know whether they've admitted that yet or not. And there are some, and being in the position I was and doing the things and having the freedom to do some of the things I did, it was kind of really ironic that we were doing all over again what the French had did unsuccessfully years before us. And we were there because we were kind of committed because of our agreements to back the French in kind of a odd kind of way. And one of the things I remember, just the whole irony of it was we were up in a I think that's probably I got to go on one of the recon flights. I don't know whether it was with General Ware or one of their commanders, but we flew all over the area, and as close as I think within 2 or 3 miles of Cambodia, there's a ranch house about 3 miles from the Cambodian border, directly in the path of where all the bad guys are coming into Vietnam, with a manicured lawn, probably about 10, 15 acres, all around this beautiful ranch house. Not a pockmark anywhere of any kind of artillery, nothing in that entire area. And about a mile to the east of it, there's a base, one of our base camps, that's pockmarked all over the place. And these are within a mile of each other. And you go, wait a minute. And that was a bone of contention that I think the official language of the government was still French, I think, in most of the offices. That the French, having been there, had instilled their culture and their system so well that they were, by a lot of the population and professional population, educated population, were very much respected and revered as good guys. And it's like, wait a minute, these are the guys that did all this crap to you. But all over Vietnam, there were places like enclaves of this is nobody touches this area. The Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, nobody. We don't touch it. Nobody touches it. Which was really kind of interesting, frustrating, and just didn't make sense. Kind of thing.
Why do you think that they would not touch those areas?
My guess is because they were probably landowners, probably remnants of French, where they probably, well, I'm sure they owned a lot of the property. They were so entrenched in the economics of the country, I think, and into the government of the country, and a lot of the civil servants were educated in French. They spoke French. It at that time was, and it still is in some ways, very much the culture, a part of the culture, much more than we are. We've left our footprint there, but not anything like the French. And that was something that to learn about the Vietnamese, that their entire history has been subservient to some invading country, to the point where they would like to think of themselves as the pure enemies race. Truth is, they're a mixture of Japanese, Chinese, Indian, Pakistani. The Chinese, when I was there, were pretty much the farmers. They had the pharmacies, they had the laundries, they had most of the businesses, the restaurants. They were the landowners, and the Vietnamese would rent space on the sidewalk out in front of the Chinese restaurants. The Vietnamese would cook delicious food on the sidewalk and sell it to the clients, who would take it into the Chinese restaurant and buy their drinks from the Chinese restaurant owner. large part of Saigon was Chinese. The Indians had controlled almost all of the financial black market, fronted in newsstands and bookstores. In many ways, and they allowed that. Well, I'm not sure why they allowed it. That was always kind of interesting that they and the French in many ways controlled a lot of the governments and the civil services, either directly or indirectly. They had these three nationalities almost having the Vietnamese subservient to them. Well, frankly, like my wife, when it came down to the village level, they didn't care. They just wanted left alone so I can go out and tend my garden, tend my paddy, and tend my livestock and not get hurt. Just leave me alone. We don't care what the government is, in many ways. Which would be interesting to see what it really is now. And at some point, I think it's pretty much been debunked that even though there was large backing from China and Russia, that there's no way that Vietnam was really going to be a puppet of China. They'd been fighting invaders for too long to do it, and they were too good at what they were doing. It's like, we'll take your money, we'll take your stuff, but you're not going to take over. And I think that became pretty clear to most of the GIs over there, especially after the peace talks started. It's like, they're playing a game. It's like these guys have been fighting this kind of war a whole lot longer than any of the people contributing to it. The big guys are throwing in money and people, but the Vietnamese citizens are the ones that have been doing it the longest, and they know how to do it better.
How did it make you feel that you didn't have much control over the situation? Politicians that they would restrict what you could do. I mean, did it make you feel helpless?
Oh, most of the time just pissed. Yeah. It's like, oh, this is crap. You mean we got to do, what do you mean we can't go in there and just wipe out the whole thing? Which was pretty much, the guys particularly that went out in the field day after day would just come back just really angry because they weren't allowed to do this or that. And the frustration was there, but yeah, when you're getting shot at, I don't know what that's like one-on-one, but having been in the path of rockets, it's like you don't care. You don't care who's shooting at you. You want to make it stop, and you want to do whatever is necessary to make it stop. You know, that politics aren't important. It's like, I'm going to do what's necessary to make it stop, except if you're told you can't. Well, yeah, they came from that village. Well, it's a friendly village. You can't fire there. And that was the kind of thing that happened an awful lot because the Viet Cong, whatever, the bad guys, the communists, had learned you shield yourself with whoever's perceived the good. It's like, okay, if we shoot from this village, which is a friendly village, we know they can't shoot back at us. So what are you going to do? You're going to go there where you're not going to get shot back at. I mean, it's as simple as that. Because we pretty much made it clear what our rules of engagement were. I mean, I'm absolutely sure that the communist forces, Viet Cong, whoever the bad guys were, had maps as accurate as ours. It's like, okay, they can shoot here, they can shoot here, they can do anything here. They can't here, or they can there during the day, but not at night. They knew that, and they used that to their advantage, like anybody would. You know, most of the time it was just, you're crazy.
Did you ever witness anybody crack up? And what did you ever crack up under rocket fire? Or
we had one guy that just, yeah, he couldn't take it. Actually, yeah, he was Section 9'd out, and that was, he'd come back from a particularly nasty encounter, you know, and just couldn't take it, and they sent him back to the States. Myself, no, I guess I was fortunate enough to find ways of looking at both sides or justifying it as amusing rather than tragic. One of the guys that was on guard duty once, one of my guys, fell asleep, and it was one of the times where, hey, you don't fall asleep. They're actively, I mean, they're going right through the perimeters. He was shot by a Vietnamese with a 38, and that woke him up. Fortunately, he was shot through the elbow, and he's a big guy, big guy from the farm, muscles all over the place. Was shot in the elbow, woke up, grabbed the guy. Fortunately, the guy had it on a lanyard around his neck, strangled him, drug him all the way back to the headquarters compound. He was dead by then. And it's like, wait a minute, you were sleeping. That's an Article 15. But you killed this guy, so he got a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for falling asleep, basically. And in some ways, that kind of personified the whole crazy mess of what was going on. It's like, yeah, you really screwed up royally, but on the other hand, yeah, you did this. Oh, good guy. So he got an entry, got shipped back to the States with 2 medals, and it was like, and it's times like that where I think that's when I realized there's only about that much difference between the good guys and the bad guys. If it went just a little bit either way, it determines whether you're a hero or the bad guy or the loser. It doesn't take much to tip it one way or the other. Yeah, we laughed about that one for quite a while. And that was the timeline. I'm not sure, but if I remember, in the early '90s, late '80s, and early '68, most of '69, I guess, was pretty crappy. That we didn't have much time to think about anything except ducking.
How many times a day would you be hit with rockets?
For a while, 2 times a day. Mid-morning sometime, and 3 or 4 o'clock, but you never knew exactly when. You kind of, this kind of, and it was just harassing most of the time. The closest I came to it, and it almost seems unreal. I don't remember what we were doing exactly. One guy was crossing a footbridge over one of the drainage ditches, and rocket went under him, and he ended up hundreds of feet around, just pieces. And somehow, when it's that far separated, it's not really real. It's not identifiable pieces of a human. So it's easy to say that's not bad. Of course, it wasn't me. Yeah, I had a good injury. I didn't talk about a good injury. I have an injury, can't remember where, either here or here. I was taking a shower one evening. We had, it was cool, solar heated. We were green then. We had drums on top of the head, basically louvered structures, and drums on top of them that were heated during the day. So if you want a nice shower, you got a shower just at sundown. And we were fortunate enough to have electricity. We had light bulbs in our hooches and in the showers. And I'm taking a shower, and one of the bulbs in our tent had burned out. So I'm going, oh, light bulb. So I climbed up the side of the shower and unscrewed the light bulb, and it was hot, and I dropped it, and it stuck to my side. So I pulled it off and pulled the skin off, and I didn't get a Purple Heart for it, but it hurt. But I got a light bulb. It's like, didn't get my Purple Heart. I'm trying to remember the geography of the place there, and I can't for the life of me remember. It was a large base camp that had an abandoned. They were masonry structures that had housed the workers I don't know whether it was the lab technicians or what, but had housed people that worked for the Michelin plantation people. Back when, I don't know how old the structures were, but those were largely either, almost all of them had major holes bombed in them or shot through them. They weren't occupied. But it was almost like two cities inside the little village and then us inside this compound. Behind 2 and 3 rows of double wire. And in '69, that's when they actually came right through, even into the compound, our headquarters compound, division headquarters compound. That's how little defense we actually had when it came right down to it.
So did they come in during TET?
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe TET a little bit, just from your experiences?
It was almost we had kind of predicted it, but at the same time you don't really think that's going to happen. That it's like no matter how many installations we had, it's almost like it didn't matter. They went right around where we were and went infiltrated into the cities, into the villages, into our posts. It's almost like we weren't there. Well, a lot of times, well, we weren't there. We were where we thought they were, but they weren't where we were, is basically what happened. And we had almost every fixed installation that we had suffered major damage at that time, because that's the way we did things. We kind of had our major installations and we'd go out, and anyone with a little bit of sense would realize that's what we were doing after a while and go, well, they're out there. That means that most of the guys that are on base are undefended. It didn't take much to figure that out. And that's kind of what happened. Looking back at it, we had no idea that was going to happen. I think that was probably hubris on our part to think that we had things under control that much, where we had virtually nothing under control.
How did that make you feel when you came to that realization that, before you thought, hey, we have this under control, and then all of a sudden it sort of clicks and say, well, that wasn't true at all?
I think by that time I wasn't even thinking about that, because I was at the point where I don't know whether I knew I wasn't going to be there very much longer, so it didn't really matter. I started sleeping in the bunkers again. Hadn't slept in the bunkers for over a year, and it's like, oh, wait a minute. You have the attitude that's like, I've been here how many days? My odds are not as good now as where reality is. Your odds are as good every day as they were the day before. But you don't think of it that way. When you do the same thing every day, you think, oh no, my odds are getting worse, but it's not.
Is this when you were a short timer?
Mm-hmm. I was a short timer, and I slept in the bunker with rats crawling over me, and it's like I was convinced that I wasn't going to make it up, because there were a lot of guys on base that I don't know whether it's because they became careless or for whatever reasons, in their last few days just didn't make it out. So in its own way, I suppose it's kind of like kind of a paranoia after a while, where your survival instinct kicks in, I think, and that's about all you're worried about, and you kind of block out everything else. To a degree. I don't think, well, I know there was it never got to the point where you forgot that there were a bunch of other guys there that you were responsible for. Probably, yes, some of the best friendships that I ever had, I think, were there because you had to look out for each other. Some good guys.
just to shift a little bit, 1968 was obviously very hectic in terms of events in the U.S. with Martin Luther King getting assassinated, Bobby Kennedy, all the things that happened. How did from Vietnam? How did it appear, or how did the United States appear to you?
Oh, we thought you guys were crazy as hell. Could not fathom it. It's just, they're doing what? I mean, because we're sleeping right next to, we're huddled next to black guys. I mean, they're our buddies. Black guys, Spanish guys, Puerto Rican guys. And what? You guys are back there. You need to come over here and learn not to do that. But we thought things were just absolutely crazy in the States. Absurd. It's like, how can you be harming each other when we're over here, all of us, we're over here protecting you guys so you can kill each other? Yeah, there was a lot of anger. Overall, I'd say there was a lot of anger for that, and there was a lot of anger for the government, because it was like, okay, flip-flop, we're going to bomb, we're not going to bomb, we're going to do this, we're going to talk peace, we're not going to talk peace. I had an ironic, that's kind of how democracy works, though. It's checks and balances. It's two extremes kind of at each other a lot. But yeah, the race thing, when were the riots were in Detroit, and what year was that?
68 in Chicago.
Was Chicago. I came through Detroit and was just amazed. I mean, it looked worse than any bombed out anything that I'd seen before. Well, when it started, though, what year did the race thing start? Because I remember it being in Germany, and I'm not sure what year that was, where all kinds of racial crap was going on in the States. And we specifically one of our orders was you don't walk across the parade field, period. Because in most bases, the parade field, that's the center point to get to one point or the other. You usually walk across the parade field. The orders came down, you don't walk across the parade field, and if you go anywhere, you don't go by yourself, and go in groups, and if you can, if you've got a black friend, go with a black friend. I mean, let's don't start a race riot here. Those crazy people over there are already doing it. It's like, and it was like, why? And part of the feeling, I guess, was because in a certain way, the military is kind of homogeneous, I guess. It doesn't matter who you are. You may be doing exactly the same thing as somebody else that is another race. And it may be because of the size of the community, but you just develop bonds that for some reason just didn't happen back, what we used to talk about back in the States, as if it were almost like another world.
How did you feel about the anti-war protests?
Sometimes, bring them over here, we'll shoot them. That in many ways that they were betraying that, kind of betraying everything that we were doing, not necessarily betraying, but making it harder on us. We understood it, and maybe sometimes even sympathized with it, but it was just the wrong kind, maybe the right thing to do at the wrong time. And most of us, looking back on it now, I can understand it, but and I didn't see any of it, but friends and family have told me about it, that it was like, well, what would you do if you saw all that blood and gore at supper time every night? It was in our homes, and that was the first time that ever happened. And oh golly, it was probably at least 10 years after coming back. I never saw it on television. If anything came on television about it, I'd turn it off or switch the channels. Didn't see any of the movies that were about it. I think the only one I've seen now is Platoon, and I'm not sure that I could even want to now. I don't particularly want to. Would watch them now. I don't know. It's just not something you don't want to talk about, I guess, or reach to or relive. For whatever reason, maybe it's dramatized for sale, or the whole experience, I guess, was such a frustrating kind of helpless bunch of maybe the motives were good, but what happened I don't think served anybody's purpose. The joke was we do this about every 20 years because the military and the industrial manufacturers, we have stockpiles of all these cool weapons that we haven't tried, so we find some place to test them. You know, find a helpless country that really can't do much about it, we'll test them over there. We have all these ordnances left over from World War II that what are we going to do with them? Drop them over there. Wow, this is a cool weapon. Wonder if it really works. And part of that still sticks with me today, particularly. I think maybe a lot of it is we've got about maybe a 10, 15, 20-year memory, and after that we forgot what it was about, and so we do it again. And part of me just hasn't accepted yet that and even when I accept it, I don't like it, and I figure there should be a different way. If as a nation we've got something and there's somebody else somewhere else that wants it, and they're willing to do anything, including kill us, to take what we have. And unfortunately, we get our signals mixed up sometimes, and in many ways, I think the whole Cold War thing was a misjudgment on our part, that somehow the Russians or the Chinese, well, the Chinese now are going to take what we have by force. It's a lot smarter to do it the way we do it most of the time, and that's by economics instead of force. And that's not a real popular feeling, but having seen a lot of the experience I've gone through, it's I guess I've accepted the fact that I tell people we're about half a step out of the cave, and we're, as a race, we're pretty barbaric, and if somebody has something we want, we'll take it. We just get better at killing the other people to take it. Is that correct historically? I'm not a historian, but I guess sometimes I have just kind of a attitude about it. It's like, okay, do whatever you can to survive, and I guess if I were in the same, well, no, if I were in the same place on a smaller scale of somebody threatening me, I would do what's necessary to get rid of the threat.
When did you leave Vietnam?
As soon as I could. No, that's not quite true. I left under duress. I didn't want to leave, which is, I suppose they were right. I was kind of insane. It's like, no, you're crazy. Go home. I left, I believe, after extending once or twice. I think it was at least twice. I was trying to get married, so I kept extending to work out the paperwork, basically let her father know I was a good guy and wasn't going to do terrible things and steal her daughter and his grandkids, and that my intentions were honorable and all that stuff. On one side I was trying to convince her dad, but then I was trying to convince the psychologist, because once you were found out, it was like you're crazy. How can you like one of these people? You need counseling. If you want to get married, you have to have counseling, but the catch is if you have counseling, you're told that you're crazy, go home. Well, I don't want to go home. So I basically ended up going home, I think, about 3 months or 6 months before I actually was due to be discharged. And that was on one part it was like a real, no, it wasn't a relief. I was going to say it was a relief, but things had quieted down again. This was, I really don't know. I'm thinking that it was the spring of '69 where things were quieted down quite a bit. And there was no reason to leave. Everything was cool. And I didn't have my paperwork done yet. So I was upset that I had to come back. Part of the reason I think maybe I didn't want to come back because things were kind of ugly here. Probably if I had my way at that time, I probably would have stayed there and gotten discharged there and found some kind of civilian job and stayed there rather than come back to the States. Because I think at that time I really didn't have, didn't accept my brothers and sisters. I didn't have a whole lot of ties left in the States, and it was like, wasn't a very nice place to come back to. Everybody was in a bunch of the civil strife, I guess. I really hadn't thought of it that way before, but my mindset then was, I could stay here. Beautiful country. And by that time, I'd learned a little bit Vietnamese, and I really had learned to respect them and their culture, and really, I guess, their way of life. So I came back and did what was necessary to go back again. And my dad, yeah, definitely that was not something I should do, but I was going to do it anyway. I came back and finished up my degree and worked nights at Ball Corp. Scraped enough money together, got a ticket, a round-trip ticket, went back over.
When did you go back?
When?
Yeah.
That would have been late '69, I believe. Long time. I don't have any of the papers and documents now, but it would have been fairly in the fall, probably of '69. You know, somewhere in there. Yeah, I'm trying to put together the chronology because somewhere in there my father died, and I think that was in '69. I don't know. It's easy to forget the details that long ago. But the short of it is that I went back and got a room in at the Pasteur Hotel, 40-something Pasteur Lane in Saigon, for some ridiculously little amount of money. And as soon as I got settled, took a bus to Bencat, and I believe I got married that year. I'm not sure. Anyway, I started the process of getting papers and things for my fiance and her kids. And at that time, I think the Vietnamese were as reluctant for them to marry us as we were to marry them. In some ways, but for 3 months, I think, that first trip, I spent almost every day, every other day, taking a bus back and forth from Saigon to her village. And going here and getting that paper, and almost every piece of paper that you had was consistent on some other piece of paper document supporting that. The short of it is that by the time you got one document, another document would be out of date and wasn't usable. Just bureaucratic nightmare. And being pretty naive, I did it the way you were supposed to, and this and that, and couldn't do that, couldn't do this, and enjoyed the heck out of Saigon, though. In the meantime, learned their street food is really fantastic, and my wife got angry because I loved the sandwiches on the street and the street food, and peasants eat that stuff. You don't eat that. You're a teacher. You don't eat that crap. I said, but it's good. And I'd try something different every time I ate, and it was really, really learned to enjoy the culture. But anyway, the story is my visa expired and I had to come back. So I came back and went back to next year, scraped together some more money, went back in 70 or 60, 70, I think, yeah. And went through the same thing again. I think at the same hotel, as a matter of fact. They wouldn't let me stay in the village more than one night at a time, so I had to stay in Saigon. Occasionally she would go to Saigon, but most of the time she would be home and I'd be in Saigon. Up until, I think, 1 day or 2 days before my visa was ready to expire again, we were at the Vietnamese embassy, just nuts because the papers were expiring, we weren't going to get it. And we talked to a Vietnamese civil servant who agreed for $50 U.S. currency, which was, there was a two-tier currency. The U.S. currency was really freely traded. At the same time, the military script and Vietnamese currency. You've got three currencies kind of competing with each other. So anyway, for $50, this civil servant in less than 2 hours got every document we needed, all the stamps and things on our visas and passports that I couldn't do in 2 years. Got them for us. We had our plane tickets. We were terrified up to the time the airplane took off the ground, lifted off the ground, that we were going to get caught and put in jail because all these documents were falsified. But we got the 4 seats in the middle of a 747, put down all the armrests, and it was like a huge couch on the way back to the States. Ta-da! And did it. And that in itself was an adventure. In the crazy thing about being over there as a civilian was that I had never realized how much infrastructure we take everywhere we go. We mean the United States. Some of the best schools we have, I've seen overseas. Guam has an amazing school. Some of the just amazing institutes and schools and facilities that we've got overseas to support our not only our military, but huge cadre of civil servants, the envoy liaisons, all of the foreign workers, and in particular the international companies, construction companies in particular, have branches all over the world, and generally, if they're there for more than 6 months or a year, they take their families with them. Amazing infrastructure that we import. It's staggering to imagine what the cost is of just the logistics and the support, which coincidentally, every time I hear we're going to pull out of Iraq in a month or 2 months, no, what you can't do it. Sure, you should pick up and leave, except the support structures, the supply line to support something like we've got over there. It's just amazing. It's amazing that we can, the amount of money that we spend to support our military actions is just astounding when you consider that the smallest part of that whole thing are the troops on the ground. That's the smallest fraction of what we've actually sent. It's mind-boggling that we can do it. I'm amazed that we can afford to do it.
So can you tell me a little bit about your life after you returned to the States with your wife and?
Yeah, it was it was interesting. The kids by that time were 5 and 6, and we spoke no English. My wife spoke a little bit of broken English, and she some of it didn't know how to plug in an electric plug, with basic things like that. Everything was kind of temporary plastered together, because I had no idea that I was going to actually pull the whole thing off, I guess. And I don't even think I had graduated yet. I hadn't graduated yet, I don't think. All I remember is that we spent our first night on a mattress in an apartment downtown Muncie here somewhere. I remember the building. Peckinpah, one of insurance agents. That's all I could find, all I could afford for some reason. We had a mattress and I think a kitchen table. But we were pretty happy. Now I remember. I re-enrolled at Ball State and to finish up my degree, and we got an apartment at Scheidler, or not Scheidler, the big ones. Or the Scheidler, or there's two groups of them. There's a small Clinton and there runs.
There's Scheidler and Anthony.
Anthony apartment. No, Scheidler. Anthony is a small one. We were out at Scheidler. They had just finished them, and it was a mud hole in the back. Anyway, that was pretty okay, except I had no car, couldn't afford it. After the expense of doing all this stuff, I had no money. But I had an assistantship, and I would walk from the art department to Scheidler every day, and we kept the kids out of school, and I don't know why. We kept the kids out of school the first year so they could, quote-unquote, learn English. We put them in school, and they picked up English within a week or two. They're fine. And their mother was struggling with it. But I finished my degree, decided to move back to my hometown, Jonesboro, and got a job in the Mississippi system. And my two daughters were one of my first students, actually. Bad mistake for several reasons. A town of 2,500, middle of the Bible Belt. We're still in Vietnam. I don't think we even had a token black yet in Jonesboro. And that was catastrophic. This is where I grew up. This is I bought the house that I had grown up in, thinking that, this is a nice little town. I can instill good values in the kids here. It'll be a good place to go. We got yelled at on the street. Get that commie, get those cooks out of here, you commie, you traitor, da-da-da. That lasted, I think, for about 6 months. And I think it was only because our youngest daughter was born, and so as soon as I could, we moved moved out of Jonesboro back to Muncie, because Muncie's more tolerant of, more liberal and more tolerant. And it is, as long as you're in this quadrant of town. Muncie's kind of like a large Jonesboro in many ways. But fortunately, I had ties with the college, and we kind of stayed in this quadrant in Normal City, and met at that time there were things were kind of rolling down in Vietnam. The war was kind of ending and all that, and by that time we learned that, well, if you want Vietnamese food, you go to Indianapolis or you go to Chicago, and we found a couple in Marion, a couple couples in Anderson, and had a fairly, those were our best friends, were other Vietnamese American couples. It was kind of, we almost had to, that was the only friends we had really, except for immediate family. And of course they accepted us because we were family. But that was our family in the United States. And at that time it was, I think, maybe 6 families in this immediate area within 25 miles. Of course there are a lot more, but most of our activities were with those couples, or we would go to things in Indianapolis because there was just more population there. But most, unfortunately, my marriage and almost all of, I think everyone that I know, they're no longer together
So
for various reasons. Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that we've missed that you would like to talk about?
Not that I can think of. No. It was a good ride. I'd do it again.
Well, on behalf of myself and Ball State University, we would like to thank you for your service to this country and for assisting us in this project.
Mm-hmm.
This will be a really huge help.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, every time I get uneasy every time somebody says it was service, because most of the time it wasn't willing, and most of the time it didn't feel like it. It felt more like survival, doing what was necessary to survive. And yeah, that may be part of because of the climate and because of the way the thing turned out. It never felt like it then. It still doesn't feel like it. Almost feels like something more to be ashamed of. We almost had to. That was the only friends we had really, except for immediate family. And of course they accepted us because we were family. But that was our family in the United States. And at that time it was, I think, maybe 6 families in this immediate area within 25 miles. Of course there are a lot more, but most of our activities were with those couples, or we would go to things in Indianapolis because there was just more population there. But most, unfortunately, my marriage and almost all of, I think everyone that I know, they're no longer together
So
for various reasons. Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that we've missed that you would like to talk about?
Not that I can think of. No. It was a good ride. I'd do it again.
Well, on behalf of myself and Ball State University, we would like to thank you for your service to this country and for assisting us in this project.
Mm-hmm.
This will be a really huge help.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, every time I get uneasy every time somebody says it was service, because most of the time it wasn't willing, and most of the time it didn't feel like it. It felt more like survival, doing what was necessary to survive. And yeah, that may be part of because of the climate and because of the way the thing turned out. It never felt like it then. It still doesn't feel like it. Almost feels like something more to be ashamed of rather than to have been a part of. And that's kind of unfortunate. Doubly because I brought one of them back. It kind of made it worse to a lot of the guys that came back. It's like, how could you do something like that? But fortunately, I never, well, good and bad, I never found it a bad place to be, in spite of what happened.
Well, thank you for your help.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
And they're our friends now. So I guess it's okay now.